War of the Spark. War of the Spark never changes. More than a millennium ago, an elder dragon almost dies, but then doesn't die, becomes a god instead. You know, like you do. But then, an old man god blows up an evil robot wannabe god and rips holes in the space-time continuum, and a bunch of other gods plug those holes up with themselves. And then that dragon god isn't a god anymore. It's just a plain old magical dragon with more power than any other being alive. You know how it goes. You enslave an entire world and make mummies, and then you cover the mummies in metal, magic metal, and you rig a science fair. That way, you can steal the inventions from the science fair. And one of the inventions, oh yeah, it lets you teleport your metal mummies to a city that's as big as a planet, because it's always the same. Then you trick a Gorgon into becoming a pirate captain and have her go steal an undying sun that vampires worship. But it was really made by a giant sphinx and your twin brother as a way to trap you back when you were a god. But the trap failed, and now you have the undying sun. And you bring that undying sun to the city planet where your metal mummies are, because that's just the way war goes. Then a whole bunch of people with loose connections to one another try and stop you, because they like the city planet, and you're gonna destroy the city planet. Or so they think, but you really want to destroy them and eat their souls, like 36 of their souls, because then you get to be a god again. It's always the same damn story. But then, a lady whose hair is on fire blowed up the undying sun, and a problematic villainess makes the metal mummies attack you. And they eat your soul, and so you don't get to be a god. You don't even get to go shopping at the city planet or be a pirate captain. You just have to spend all your time alone with your twin brother, who you hate. And everyone else is going to go off to a Viking world, or maybe a storybook land, or Japan. And that's the War of the Spark for you. It's always the same. And also, Dak Faden died. Before I get into my top picks for Modern, I want to start with an honorary mention. Now, this honorary mention is actually one of my personal favorite cards from the set. It's not the most powerful, not by far. It's certainly headed to Commander, but I do believe it might find a place in Modern where I think it's a sleeper with the potential to really take hold. And that card is Karn's Bastion. Superb in its simplicity, Karn's Bastion is a land that can be tapped for a colorless mana, or 4 mana of any color can be spent to tap it to proliferate, which means you choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. Proliferate is a fantastic ability, but we've never had it on such a universal piece like this before. Even in the Scars of Mirrodin block, where the keyword was first introduced, no lands would allow you to proliferate, least of all with mana of any color. The closest card to this, in my mind, is the classic Contagion Engine, which was an artifact that could be put into any deck, and for 4 would proliferate, then proliferate again, but it costs 6 mana to bring into play. So even with the added effect of -1/-1 counters being put on all creatures that your opponent has, the engine was pricey. Here we have the key ability of Contagion Engine on a land. While it doesn't proliferate twice like Engine did, it's on a land, which means you just play it and don't have to pay to bring it into play. And it also doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. So where might this go in Modern? Obviously, a lot of people are going to think about putting this into Infect, and I can see it finding a home there. Karn's Bastion would be helpful in Infect when games go long. But Infect doesn't usually go late game. It's an inner win sort of deck, and if you didn't win right when you got in, you're out. So I don't think Infect fact wants this as much as another modern deck I've had my eyes on, Hardened Scales. Scales is filled with counter cards, from Walking Ballista to Hangerback Walker, and Bastion is going to probably do a better job than something like Township in terms of juicing up decks like this. But here's what really scares me about Bastion. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. You see, Teferi's +1 can untap Bastion, and as Teferi untaps any 2 lands, tap Bastion, proliferate on Teferi, +1 Teferi, untap Bastion another land, and then Bastion can proliferate again and on Teferi again, meaning the Hero of Dominaria is going to go up 3 loyalty per turn if Bastion's in play and you've got the mana to pay. Oh crap, that also is applicable for Standard. Oh, double crap, and Legacy, and everything. Everything with Teferi. Teferi can go tuck himself. But let's get to the real list, and starting off at number 5 it's actually a land as well, but this is one that is not only going to make a blast in Modern, but going to make many of your opponent's heads blast off with rage, and that card is Blast Zone. I just love lands. I should make a lands deck at some point. If I do, Blast Zone is going in, and I think it's going in a lot of modern decks as well. Why? Blast Zone enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. You can tap for a colorless mana, or spend X and X and tap to put X charge counters on Blast Zone. Spend 3 mana of any color and tap to sacrifice Blast Zone and destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So whereas Karn's Bastion was a lightweight contagion engine on a land, Blast Zone is a ratchet bomb on a land. And while it has the drawback of not hitting tokens, I guess unless you Vampire Hexmage it, this thing going off with as little as 1 is still going to be a big headache for a lot of modern decks. And removal on a land is so hard to deal with. As a land, it's also very universal in its application, so several decks are going to have their eye on this. It's an answer to enchantments for colors that normally lack such answers. Dredge decks are going to love this for taking out cards like Relics of Progenitus. Tron, still ever present, can even expedition map for it. And again, not entering tapped is what really makes this perfect for Modern, where you often are going to need to be able to fire it off immediately. Sometimes a lot faster is worth being just a bit weaker than alternatives, and I think this is going to be a blast to play in Modern. We sure seem to be on a removal kick these days. Removal has come back in full force at all levels, including common, and I feel that I may have wished just a little too hard for the days of Doomblade and Standard, as I think we've now surpassed them, bringing us to a point where Standard removal keeps leaking into Modern, from Fatal Pushes to Assassin's Trophy to now D-Spark. D-Spark is going to be a hit in Standard, where it's likely going to replace a lot of copies of Vraska's Contempt, as it hits problematic cards like Rekindling Phoenix, Experimental Frenzy, and of course that Tucker, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and also tons more. But why have I included this in my Modern list? What do you mean, why? Are you serious? It's an instant that exiles permanents for 2 mana. Do I need to go on? Exile a freaking Primeval Titan or Leyline of anything. Permanent, not creature, permanent. Goodbye, Arc-like Phoenix, you will not be missed. And I'm also a huge fan of the colors this is in. Exile target permanent in black-white is pushing into new territory. The closest we've had is maybe Vindicate or Anguished Unmaking, but those both cost too much, and D-Spark is pushing us into new, efficient territory in these colors. The biggest drawback is that I don't really think a deck currently exists that needs this card, but that doesn't mean it isn't going to be seen in Modern. By bringing something new and powerful to a color combination like this, it opens the door for new builds and new decks. And with the giant influx of Modern Horizons on the, well, horizon, every brewer is going to be looking to brew new and never before seen decks. So do you notice what my list has missed so far? Well, that's because the Planeswalkers Modern is going to love are at the top of it. Ugh. I hate Planeswalker cards, but Modern is going to love these new ones, especially the Sublime Artificer herself, Sahih Lee. Sahih Lee is a sublime artificer that costs 1 and a red-blue hybrid and a red-blue hybrid for a legendary planeswalker with loyalty 5. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. For -2, target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Don't let the fact Sahih Lee is a more expensive young pyromancer fool you. Sometimes with age comes wisdom. First of all, that added cost gets us added value, as Sahih Lee triggers on all non-creatures. Being worried about the fact that she's a planeswalker and can thus be attacked is a legitimate concern here, but we're talking 5 damage to kill, and creature removal spells aren't going to hit her the way they hit Pyromancer. But remove her, our opponents must, as Sahih Lee to power up everything from Death's Shadow to Phoenix decks as if they didn't need it. What's great is that her casting cost is in hybrid mana, meaning decks with red or blue, not red and blue, but red or blue, can make use of her. So if Phoenix doesn't want her, maybe blue control variants will. This card is way too affordable given all it does, and it might even inspire some effective shenanigans with its -2 ability. But that's not the only planeswalker about to spark joy in Modern. My top 2 picks are close. In fact, honestly, on this list, I'm just going to say my top 3 picks, all 3 planeswalkers, were really close, and I can see Sahih Lee being just as impactful as the next 2, depending on how you look at it. War really did give us some power, didn't it? I made my call on these next 2 and their order on the list, but whether my number 2 pick is really going to be number 1 for the set or number 3, I feel extremely confident in all of these planeswalkers listed here. Number 2 is Karn, the Great Creator, 4 of any color for a legendary planeswalker with loyalty 5. When Karn is in play, activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. +1 until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness each equal to its converted mana cost. For -2, you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game, or in exile. You know, why not? Reveal that card and put it into your hand. Are you kidding me, Wizards of the Coast? Maybe this should have been my number 1 pick. Just reading what this card does gives me goosebumps. Okay, there's so much to unpack here. Let's start with that -2. Karn grabs stuff out of your sideboard and out of exile. Those are 2 different things, by the way. Main board him and you've got the ability to grab answers from the sideboard. I mean, if those answers are artifacts. But in some ways, that's like starting game 1 having sideboarded against your opponent, especially since in Modern, so many hosers are artifacts. Snag that Grafdigger's Cage or Witchbane Orb or Relic of Progenitus and turn your opponent's deck off, or at least down. But it grabs things from exile, so it's also an answer for an answer, and that answer being surgical extraction. So let's say someone tries to surgically extract something like an ensnaring bridge, Karn will pluck it back from exile. And all of this while it's shut off opponent's artifacts for free, and if you want to +1 it, you're essentially getting a March of the Machines and Karn Silver Golem amalgamation that has outrageous potential not only in Modern, but Commander as well. On this week's episode of Dice to Removal, my co-host Vince went on and on about the shenanigans for Commander with this particular card. So if you missed that episode and want to hear more than just the Modern madness Karn will create, go check it out. Will Karn stack up against Karn, by which I mean Karn Liberated? I actually don't think so as far as Tron is concerned, which is ultimately why I put him at number 2 instead of number 1. For Tron, I still think Karn Liberated on turn 3 is the best robot for your buck. This Karn is going to find a lot of new homes and new ways to irritate and infuriate your opponents with his Karn-do attitude.
Karn-do.
Here we are. So what is number 1? It's a planeswalker, one that isn't Karn or Sahih Lee, although I can absolutely see other lists that place those walkers in this slot, a lot of power, but after a lot of thought and analysis, my top pick for Modern out of all of War of the Spark is the Stuff of Nightmares. Not ours, of course, but our opponents, my dears, and that is just fine with Ashiok Dream Render. Ashiok Dream Render costs 1 and a hybrid blue-black and a hybrid blue-black for a legendary planeswalker with loyalty 5 again. And with Ashiok in play, spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search their library. If you want a -1, target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, then exile each opponent's graveyard. It's another of these 3-drop hybrid mana 5 loyalty walkers. I think this is a great and powerful design by itself, but just think about all Ashiok does here. Modern is the fetch land format, and Ashiok stops fetch lands. But unlike Blood Moon, Ashiok is not just hitting fetches, but any library search of our opponents, and also, unlike the Moon, it doesn't affect us and our fetches. The closest cousin is perhaps Leonin Arbiter or Aven Mind Sensor, both in white, and both of which have ways around their effect, with Arbiter letting you pay to play, and Mind Sensor still letting you look 4 cards down. Ashiok shuts off our opponent's library searches completely, and then does a handful of other useful things. Self-mill for those who like toolkit graveyards, and then exile our opponent's graveyards in case we don't want them to toolkit theirs. This isn't a silver bullet for Dredge, but it's an expletive hurled their way. Ashiok again has the hybrid mana, so does not specifically need to be in blue-black or Esper control builds. Anything with either black or blue will do, meaning mana rampers like Noble Hierarch or even Simeon Spirit Guide can get this out turn 2, which is enough to wreck most of our opponents on mana bases alone. Ashiok absolutely is the stuff of nightmares, and especially in Modern. But now I want to hear from you. What cards do you think from War of the Spark are going to see Modern play and why? Let me know in the comments below. And I hope very much this list has been of some help to you. You can help me out by just watching one of my previous videos. No, really. It would be incredibly helpful if you go over to patreon.com and support the channel by becoming a patron alum, or perhaps going on to the Tolarian Community College student store and buying a Tolarian t-shirt or playmat. But you can really help me out just by manually hitting my video library and looking back over old videos, picking one that you haven't seen or haven't seen in a while, and watching it. Just one. That would be incredibly helpful now that YouTube is apparently hosing my channel. Thank you all. But enough about YouTube shenanigans. Are you going to War of the Spark pre-release? Want a pre-release with the professor? Well, if you're in the Seattle area, you can travel up to Mox Boarding House Ballard, where I'll be playing in the Saturday night pre-release. So come pre-release with me, the professor. I hope to see you there. And this program was made possible thanks to a sponsorship from Card Kingdom, as well as the Patreon support of viewers such as you. So thank you.